This episode of JimmyCast features my wonderful co-host, Doug Meadows, from David Douglas Diamonds in Marietta, Georgia. Doug and I have known each other for several years, and these podcasts actually came about because we have a weekly Skype conversation where we chat about anything and everything. And one day Doug said, I'll bet you about at least 200 jewelers would like to hear what we're talking about. So we started this podcast. And it all comes to you from the wonderful folks at In-Store Magazine. In my opinion, the best, most practical and interesting magazine in the business. I personally love In-Store because I believe there's not an issue you can't pick up and implement at least one fresh new idea from it. And it's brought to you by the Jewelry Store Training Institute, a weekly 10-minute training video for your staff, training them on everything from best sales practices to operations to marketing. Now featuring Excella management training. That's right, we're training your managers how to manage. All from the proven curriculum of excellence developed by Brad Houston and Jimmy DeGroot. That's me. We're not just training theory, we're training on what we've done. Learn more and get a free month of training by contacting me at jim@jewelrystoretraining.com. And now here's our episode. JimmyCast. So we're here with Doug Meadows. We finally have to get to make it about you, Doug.
That's hard to do.
But you know, when we go to trade shows and things, one of our favorite things is to sit and talk with other jewelers about what's going on in their stores and hear their stories, right?
Exactly.
I thought let's talk to Doug today. Let's peer inside Doug Meadows' life at David Douglas Diamonds.
All right.
Well, why don't you just start off by telling us your story? How did you get to Marietta, Georgia?
Marietta, Georgia. So in 1926, there was a lot going on in Detroit, and Babe Ruth loses the World Series to the St. Louis Cardinals.
Wait, you weren't alive back then yet, right?
I was not. But, people I do remember was Hugh Hefner and Marilyn Monroe. They were born that year. But more importantly to me, it was the year that my grandfather started us in this industry. And he had a trade shop in Detroit, and he just did a ton of repair work. My dad and uncle took it over probably in the 60s, I think it was. And during the 1968 Detroit riots, they were in the process of moving out to the suburbs. And so they had everything out of their downtown location except the safe. And the riots break out, and they're trying to figure out how to get their safe out of there. So from that tragedy in the summertime, they finally get moved to the suburbs in Plymouth. And in that January, they're in a building that is right above a Sherwin-Williams paint store. And right next to them is this old theater. And it had a little tiny restaurant in there. And on a Sunday afternoon, they were trying to do some plumbing work. And the next thing you know, you have the city's largest fire in 100 years. And so the whole building next to them was burning down. The fire department's goal, though, was not to let the paint store explode, because they had just gotten this huge shipment of 50-gallon drums of turpentine. And so being that it was wintertime, they pumped so much water on this place that there was probably a foot of ice on the roof. And so the fire department would not allow my dad and uncle to go back into their place of business until springtime. And so I'm like, when you're a kid and you're going through this, it's a lot of fun. You get to go see the fire trucks and all this stuff.
My goodness.
My dad's out there freezing off his butt, trying to help out, chip off the ice on the buckles of these fire coats for the firemen and get him a warm cup of coffee. But here, between the Detroit riots and a major fire, I can't even imagine what was going on, emotionally in their lives.
Sure.
Just the idea, my dad had four boys, mom and dad had 4 boys, and, just the responsibility of feeding us and taking care of us. And if you don't work, you don't get a check. And so
That's right.
they had to move down the street in the bottom of an old bank building, which again, for a little kid, it was like a playground. I mean, I had a blast, but kind of quickly fast forwarding, during high school and stuff, my dad would make me go into the shop in the summertime and do the polish. And then, I began to learn how to clean the toilets and scrub the floors, but then size the rings and solder the chains. And so I was...
Sound like a business owner.
Oh, exactly. But I got tired of the cold and snow in 82 and made a move here to Georgia. I had a temporary stop in a retail jewelry store. I worked with one of my brothers, Dan, in a jewelry store in Fairlane Town Center. It was right across the street from the world headquarters of Ford Motor Company. And it was one of those new contemporary malls. It was 3 stories to it. The jeweler, he built the shop on display. So my brother was the jeweler in the window. And, nobody had ever seen that before. Now it's pretty common, but it was so much fun. I mean, we would get flash paper from the trick shops and scare little kids to death because we had these little burning lamps to light our torches back in the day. And my brother would just wrap that up and he would just kind of throw it across the flame, and this big flame would jump up in front of these kids and they'd all jump back.
That's beautiful.
Every now and then he'd get girls lifting up their tops and flashing them. I mean, it was just crazy stuff.
Oh my goodness.
But that was my introduction to retail.
Glamorous life of a jeweler.
Yeah. My first introduction to retail / benchman kind of an idea. And one of the guys I worked with there, his name was Merle Maddox, and his dad was vice president of American Motors. And so Merle was kind of a gypsy growing up. I mean, because his dad was an executive with the motor company, they moved him around a lot. And so Merle never felt like he had one place that he called home, and he enjoyed that. And so he learned to be a jeweler, and he knew that he could really go anywhere and get a job. And
right.
And so he just enjoyed that. I mean, he would go live in an area for a year and just see if he liked it. And I got to meet him. He went to Georgia, and he invited me on down. And, growing up as a little kid, coming from Detroit, my family background is sadly relatively prejudiced. And so we had an aunt and I had an uncle, and my grandfather had moved to Florida to retire. And my grandma and aunt would take me on down to Florida. But we would stop at the Georgia-Tennessee border, gas up, eat up, clean up, and drive nonstop through Georgia, because Georgia was nothing but dirty and it wasn't a good place to be. And so they just wanted to get through it. And so I had this misconception of what Georgia and Atlanta was all about.
Sure.
And so my buddy invited me down. So I went down for a summer vacation for a week, and oh my goodness, I fell in love with Atlanta. I mean, he had a catamaran. We went sailing on Lake Lanier. We went to Dante's Down the Hatch. I mean, he spoiled me rotten, and I felt like a king and just had so much fun. I'm like, I like this place. I want to move here. And so he invited me to move on down and go in partnership with him. And so I jumped on that. I don't know how I did all this stuff as I look back. I mean, I packed up a truck, drove it on down here, scraped up enough money to put a deposit on a house. I bought my first house. And I'm 23 years old doing all this stuff.
Sure.
Right after I get here, Merle informs me that the guy, we had a lease department inside of a retail store. So we were inside of a mall, and we had, literally probably, I don't know, 10 square feet. I mean, it was dinky. It was like a New York shop. And we provided that owner of that retail store all the services. We did all of his sizing and all of his repairs and the custom work and stuff. And so he decided he wanted to get out of this and get into fast food business. So he was trying to sell the store. And here, I just bring my wife on down. I just buy a house. What am I going to do? I mean, here I think I've got a great job or a great opportunity, and now it's just disappearing. So my partner, Merle, he's got this great idea. He goes, let's buy the store, and I'm like, how are we going to do that? And he goes, I don't know, let's try. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So we begged, borrowed, and stole from everybody. We bought it. We owned it. And now this is back before you got computers, before you got cell phones. I mean, everything was handwritten. There wasn't really a cash register other than a little cash drawer. And so we weren't the best. We were both great jewelers, but we weren't good business owners or accountants.
But not uncommon in our business, right?
Exactly.
But not uncommon at all.
Well, I forget the name of that book about the entrepreneur progression of, you work somewhere and then you think, oh, I can do this. And so you start your own place of business and you just kind of stumble your way through all this stuff. And we definitely stumbled. I mean, we ended up successfully running the business into bankruptcy. And, I mean, you talk about an emotional mess. I mean, it was not fun. And, but there is life
Doug,
after bankruptcy.
Doug, who doesn't have a story like this? Who doesn't have a story
exactly.
that's like
I mean, we all
financial
have
catastrophe?
Yeah. I mean, we all can share some crazy stories of our lives and, and different things. And, but during all that, I was hungry. I was hungry for a lot of different things. And I was hungry to be successful. I was hungry for, like a biblical knowledge of how to run my business. I really longed for that faith element to be amplified in running a business, and I was not doing a good job at that. And here in Atlanta, one of the really cool things is we have so many cool ministries. We had Walk Through the Bible. We had Larry Burkett with Christian Financial Concepts. We had Fellowship of Companies for Christ International. And so I began to kind of hang on some of those guys and get encouraged and get some good words of wisdom from some really good people over all those tough times. And even my pastor today, he was a very successful business owner. He had owned hospitals and sold them all in his 30s and retired and went in full time into the ministry. And so he had he worked with Arthur Anderson. So he had a lot of business experience. And he actually, once I got out of that bankruptcy, he became a silent partner for me for a season to help me get me back on my feet. And that's when I brought my brother Dave on down from Michigan. And that's how we ended up with our David Douglas.
So he's the Dave in the David Douglas.
He's the Dave of the David Douglas. So we took Dave's name and my name and put them together. My mom and dad had 4 boys. There was Don, Dan, Dave, and Doug. And then our middle names all start with the letter G. And so we all have the same monogram. And so I was the youngest of the 4. I got that old tattered monogram sweater that got handed down, as people would do. But
I had it too. With the triangle, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So where are we at today? Where obviously it's been a bumpy road, and like I said, whose road hasn't been bumpy?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So where are we at today with the the family and succession?
Sure. Real quickly, me and Dave, we were together for many, many years, and then Dave had the foresight to say, hey, let's split up the company. We didn't enjoy working with our cousins and uncles, and let's not put our kids through that. We had 2 stores at the time. He kept our Woodstock location, and he let me keep the Marietta location. He allowed me to keep the name of the company, and he changed the name of his store to Art Jewelers after our grandfather. Our grandfather name was Arthur Meadows. And when he first started, his company was called Art Jewelers. And so Dave kind of inherited that.
Okay.
Now I have my son working with me, Joseph, and he's been working hard here since he was 13, and he's getting Sunday, he's turning 28. And, going through some tough times, 15 years ago or so, actually 10 years ago, we went through some odd things again, some financial challenges. And I had the state of Georgia knocking on my door, wanting some back sales tax from 15 years prior. And I just didn't have it. And so they basically shut me down. 2 months before they did that, we had started Joseph.
They shut you down so you could find the money to.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah, okay. Yeah. Their logic was crazy. Sense. And what was so funny is, when they came in, I go, I am so glad you guys are here, and they go, are you crazy? And I go, no, because now you'll finally talk to me. I'd been trying to have a conversation with them for 3 years prior to that. And everything was no, you can't do it that way. Well, I finally got to do what I wanted to do and was able to do. And, but we'd started a corporation for Joseph 2 months prior, and we literally flipped the switch and reopened the next day under Joseph's new company. And nice. I can't even sign a paycheck. And Joseph is the owner of the company now. So I took care of a lot of problems that I hear a lot of jewelers having with succession and how do you deal with your kids. And it was just all decided for me. So I hope he has compassion for his father and takes good care of him in his elderly years.
That's right. The way it used to be.
That's right.
It used to be.
But
okay. So, you've been through a lot, and there would definitely be a lot of cocktails going down, telling your story, because we could tell this story for a long time. There's a lot of fun details, a
lot of crazy stuff.
How you and I met, how you and I started working together, and things like that. But okay, so. Somebody is 21 years old, and they just started in the jewelry business, and they're thinking, hey, I'd like to have my own jewelry store someday. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I was that 21-year-old, and somebody said, good luck, buddy.
Let me know how that works out for you.
Yeah, and he owned a jewelry store. He'd been in the jewelry business for a long time, and so unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a lot of encouragement out there for anybody, whether it's just jewelry industry or any business. You got to have just a lot of, stupid energy to go after it. And
but one of the things that we did, we were a coin shop basically, and we realized what we didn't know, and so what we did is we hired consultants. We hired consultants for inventory management, for cash flow management, for management, people management.
Yeah, sure.
And you're very much like that too. You are one of the largest seekers of knowledge I've ever met. And so I would think, based upon the life that I know that you live, is maybe your advice or my advice would also be just realize what you don't know, and then find that knowledge from somebody.
Yeah.
You said you had a lot of faith, but you realized that you couldn't just faith your way through it. You had to do the work too.
Yeah. Definitely. And but Jimmy, we've got probably a whole nother podcast we could talk about between how we met and some of the things that are going on with you, that maybe we should continue on with this next week or next time.
Yeah, we'll do that and, another time. So okay, so where you're at right now is tell us about your store right now. Basically full service jewelers on staff.
Yep.
You know,
We got a 2,800 square feet. You know, we finally, years ago, we broke that $1 million mark. So we're in the $1 million club. And, you know, I've got 8 full-time people. I've got, you know, 3 jewelers on staff. I've got, you know, 4 sales associates and, you know, part-time bookkeeper and different things like that.
so where do you want to be? You know, the cliche job interview question. So where do you want to be 5 years from now? What do you want to be doing in 5 years?
You know, I'm having too much fun right here. I mean, I really enjoy it. You know, I would,
Okay. That was a good pat answer.
Well, and it's serious because I mean, my wife cracks me up because she goes, "You've got more passion for this business than I've ever seen you have in all these years." And it's, we just, you know, it's such exciting times. I mean, we got new technology in the industry. We got lab-grown diamonds. I mean, it's like the wild, wild west right now in our industry.
Right.
And it's in such chaos and upheaval. And there's new discoveries right around the corner. I can't wait to go to Vegas and see, you know, what kind of new things are out there and what's going on and learn from people out there. But, you know, if I was to do anything more, it would be to travel. You know, I really have a passion to teach business in third world countries. I've tried to do micro business lending in the past, and I don't really enjoy that. But what I really enjoy is teaching and empowering young kids on either how to be a good employee or how to be an entrepreneur. You know, and by teaching,
I'm going to add the word steward in there,
and being a good steward of you know, their resources, their time, their talents, their money, all that good stuff. And so
beautiful. All right, well, we'll continue this. We'll continue the story next time and dive into some more details. How's that?
That'd be great, because I want to hear more about you and how we met, and because that was a real special time for me. So
you know, and again, I just it's funny when I bet you 99% of the jewelers that are listening to this right now would be, you know, they would have a very similar story in terms of how things came along, and
exactly,
you know, we almost lost the building, or we almost, you know,
or maybe they did lose a building and had to start all over, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And
I mean, there's a lot I mean, my tragedies are minimal compared to some of the people that I've had opportunity to share with or talk with.
Yeah, and we haven't even told the tractor story yet.
That's right.